The morning the river mist clung to the cypress knees like pale ghosts, Eveline Tamber rose before the bell and before the whip-song of cicadas, and before the first voice in the kitchen reached for her name. She folded her rough blanket with the care of a letter no one would ever read, tucked it to the far corner of her pallet, and slipped her feet onto the cool earthen floor. Her hands found the chipped basin, the small cake of lye soap she rationed like flour, and she washed in silence, already hearing the day's work in the architecture of her bones. The plantation house stood above the river like a lord of tides, windows gleaming as if sun and money had been poured over them until both hardened into glass. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. She whispered no prayer. She had learned that the river listened more faithfully than heaven did. The river had taught her about currents, how a hand placed at the right angle could turn a log aside, how a murmur could hide a plan, how a current could be read when the surface looked still. The kitchen would be her current today and all the days after, until she made it something else. Eveline crossed the yard before first light and counted the steps as she always did, a private arithmetic of survival that kept her breathing in the same world that tried to pull the air from her. 9 steps to the kitchen door. 3 to the hearth. 2 to the hook where the great iron pot hung, black as a moonless thought. The kitchen was her country, brick floor red with old smoke, walls seamed with soot, shelves lined with pewter and cracked porcelain, herbs hung from rafters like tiny congregations of grain. Carswell Plantation might have claimed the river, the fields, the bodies, the bones, but this room, this small geometry of fire and steam, belonged to her in a way ownership could not imagine. She tucked a stray coil of hair beneath her kerchief and set to waking the coals with the bellows. The embers breathed back. The first light shouldered in through the small window like a tired worker. She measured the day by the things that needed doing: biscuits before sun, coffee ground to please the overseer's sour tongue, cornmeal set for mush, ham rashers sliced thin for the master's plate, and a pear preserve spread so even the mistress might lift an eyebrow in that way she had, surprised not by taste, but by competence. She moved with quiet precision, each task memorized and tempered by care. Eveline understood that a kitchen was a ledger, of debts and favors, of absence and alchemy. None of it written down where anyone could read it, all of it notched into the mind. She kept 2 ledgers, one of butter and bread, and one of people. The second ledger was more delicate. You could skim curds from milk and have cream, you could turn cream and have butter, but some people soured on their own. When the house began to stir, the kitchen girls Tansy and Liddy slipped in, bleary and blinking, carrying the weight of late-night mending in their eyes. Eveline nodded to them, shaped dough while they fetched water, then set them to scouring with salt and ash. Smoke braided itself into her kerchief, salt clung to her fingers, the first pan of biscuits kissed the heat and swelled like rising chest. Careful with that knife, she told Liddy when the girl began to saw at the ham with the frustrated zeal of someone too young for such knives and such tiredness. I got it, Liddy said, and the blade skittered on bone with a sound like a bird striking glass. Eveline's hand closed over the girl's. Think of slicing letters nobody sees. Think of the blade as a pen. You don't force a pen. You give it a place to go. Liddy blinked. I can't write, she said, then lowered her voice as if the idea itself could be whipped out of her. I know what you mean, Eveline said, and gave the knife a demonstration, thin ribbons of ham falling like satin shavings. But you can think like it. That's enough to start. The back door opened without ceremony. Overseer Hawthorne stood framed in the doorway, tall, raw-boned, the loose hang of his coat at odds with the taut calculation of his eyes. He was a man who took inventory of every room down to the last spoon and the last breath. Eveline did not meet his gaze. Meeting a man like that in the eyes was like offering him the rope and the sturdy limb to throw it over. Master's early, he said. Hunting today. Coffee strong. No grit in the pot. There won't be, she said. She did not add that there never was, that only men who counted the world like coins believed they were the ones who kept things from falling apart. He sniffed the air as if ownership had sent. And the Sunday supper, he said, almost idly, though nothing in his life was idle. He wants the table full. Company coming. Yes, Evelyn said, hiding how the word placed a new weight into the scale she kept in her mind. Company meant more mouths. Company meant more silver counted before and after, more eyes passing, more chances for secrets to leak or catch. Company meant the mistress would demand a dish like the ones she bragged to visiting ladies about, the delicate turtle soup, perhaps, though turtles were harder to come by now. Or the almond custard that made the children lick their spoons clean. Evelyn's mind traveled the pantry's inventory like a riverboat reading the channel: flour enough, sugar less than she'd like, almonds could stretch if ground fine, and preserved peaches in a jar with the wax seal slightly askew. She would need to do more with less and make it look like plenty. Make him proud, Hawthorne said, then added the more honest command: don't make me answer for you. He left with his boots clicking hard on the brick like a gavel. Evelyn breathed. In, out. She turned the coffee mill, steady, steady, the beans releasing their dark perfume. Company meant more work, but it also meant opportunity. The word glowed in her like a coal coaxed from ash. Opportunity was not something given. It was something you learned to catch without letting anyone hear the splash. She ground cinnamon bark and cloves between two stones as old as the kitchen and thought of letters. She thought of the way the mistress's Bible lay on the parlor table, fat and ornamental as a roast, while the little handheld testament Evelyn had glimpsed in the master's coat pocket rode along with him like an amulet. She thought of the chalk marks the field hands sometimes scratched at night when the river hush and the whip slept too, small secret shapes under the back stoop that meant something, if you knew. She knew. She had been taught, not once like a lesson given, but many times as a lesson stolen. She remembered the small room of a white woman with a soft mouth who had been kind in the way a person might be kind to a stray. That room had smelled like orange oil and paper. She remembered tracing letters on her own thigh at night where no one would see. She remembered the river's currents and how words could be a kind of current. Tansy broke in on her thinking. The hens are stingy, the girl said, placing the basket down with 2 eggs less than they needed to be easy. Evelyn nodded. We'll stretch. Custard will do with fewer eggs if you know how to persuade it. Persuade? Liddy echoed, skeptical and enchanted in equal measure. Heat persuades. Patience persuades. Sometimes silence does, Evelyn said, and her mouth twitched with its own private humor. By the time the sun thought about being serious with its light, the house was moving like a great animal that needed feeding and brushing and reining. The master, Mr. Carswell, strode through the breezeway in hunting coat, 2 hounds skittering at his heels, his son Crispin a half-step behind, trying to lengthen his boy's legs into a man's stride. The mistress, Eliza Carswell, counted napkins as if they were votes. The younger children hunted for their misplaced shoes as if the shoes had gone off on some small adventure. Mrs. Gainsborough, the mistress's visiting cousin from inland, stood at a window turning her own ring around and around as if it could unwind the boredom of her married life. It was a house of small whirling orbits, all of them expecting the kitchen's gravity to hold. Supper, Evelyn thought. She set a small bowl aside, not with the furtive haste of guilt, but with the deliberate calm of someone keeping a promise to herself. She had been taking notes on the master's household for years. Notes that couldn't be burned because they had never been written. Notes written in taste and timing, in habit and hunger. She knew who salted heavily, Crispin, and who pretended dislike of sweets but made a second pass when conversation reached a comfortable hum, Eliza. She knew who cut the crusts from bread and who had a peculiar dislike for onion skins and stock. She knew who drank and who pretended not to. She had learned these facts the way one learned the sound of approaching rain. She also knew there were bottles in the locked cabinet that Hawthorne counted with his economist's soul, and powders in the same cabinet in paper wraps labeled in the master's precise hand: calomel for purges, laudanum for quiet, camphor for relief of aches caused by sitting in carriages too long and too hard. She knew these because she had fetched the key for the mistress and held the paper wraps when the master was ill. She knew the weight of them, the way some powders clung to the folds more than others, and the way certain names tasted when she sounded them out in the safe well of her mouth behind her teeth, names that would never be said aloud in the big rooms. She did not think of poison as a single act. She thought of it as sequence and sentence, as syntax. To do such a thing without being caught, a person had to be both grammar and ghost. That thought frightened her only the way truth sometimes did. She had not always been this person. Once she had been only a girl learning the kitchen as if it were the map to a small, predictable country. Then a boy named Isaiah had been sold because the master had gambled and lost. The river had churned that day under a sudden storm, and Eveline had thought, nothing is predictable. She set the ham to sizzling in its own sweet fat. She sliced onions thin enough to disappear when coaxed by time. She called for Tansy to fetch the jar of dried bay leaves and for Liddy to watch the milk so it would not scald in the second pan. She worked, and in the working, she thought. She felt the day gathering around the supper in a way only she would notice. By midday, when the kitchen air had thickened with steam and the back porch boards had warmed under the sun, Eveline slipped into the pantry and closed the door. The quiet there was like the hush between a question and its answer. She reached up to the highest shelf for the jar marked preserves, peaches softening in their own summer and sugar, and brought it down. The wax seal had a hairline crack in it. She would need to boil the peaches and the syrup to make them safe. Safe was a word with many meanings. She ran a finger along the edge of the lid and felt the sting of a small cut the tin edge gave. A drop of blood rose like a warning and then stopped. She wrapped her finger with a strip of clean cloth torn from the hem of her underskirt. The cloth was so white against her brown fingers that for a moment the sight seemed like a thought written down too plainly. "Miss Eveline," came a voice at the door, tentative but not afraid. It was Cade, the boy who saw everything because no one saw him. He fetched wood and messages and was learning the art of moving as if he were always where people had asked him to be. "Come." He slid in, shut the door with his back, and held out his hand. A folded scrap of paper, neatly creased, lay in his palm. "From Miss Ruth, housemaid Ruth," he said quickly, as if the world needed a surname for women whose whole names were stitchwork of someone else's choices. "She said I should give you in the pantry, not where I's got." Eveline took the paper and felt the tremble in it that did not belong to the paper. Cade's eyes moved to the shelves, counting like Hawthorne, but for different reasons. Boys who watched lived longer. She unfolded the scrap. The letters were clumsy but determined, the way someone wrote when they had learned late and in stolen minutes. Eveline felt a throb of kinship travel like heat along a copper wire. "Tonight. He brings Judge Barrow and Mr. Haynes, rum. Mrs. G wants your almond custard. I left you almonds in the blue tin." The sentence stopped, torn at the edge, as if someone had been interrupted. It was enough. Almond custard meant eggs, milk, sugar, crushed almonds, a little sherry if the mistress wanted to pretend a cosmopolitan taste and forget the iron boundaries of the property line. Judge Barrow meant a man who carried the law like a cudgel and a toy. Mr. Haynes meant rum and the kind of laughter that appraised women the way horse traders appraise teeth. Eveline folded the note once and then again, slipped it into the interior pocket she had sewn into her skirt lining, one of 1,000 small rebellions that made her feel less like a thing. "Tell Ruth I have the note," she told Cade, "and tell her the blue tin is a kindness. Tell her to count chairs when they bring the leaves for the table." Cade nodded. "Chairs? Guests tell their intentions when they sit down," Eveline said. The boy looked as if he wanted to smile, though smiling came hard in a life like his. When he left, Eveline took down the blue tin. It was not the almond tin the mistress used, that one was dull and dented. This tin was bright, speckled with paint like confetti. She opened it and exhaled the careful breath she'd been holding, almonds enough for a generous custard, more than the kitchen stores held. Ruth had pilfered with perfection. Eveline cracked and blanched and ground, turned the nuts into a fragrant, fine meal that would vanish into cream like a note into a symphony. As afternoon moved toward evening, the house took on its Sunday expectancy, that mixture of piety and performance that made the mistress's hands flutter and the master's stride lengthen. Eveline felt it in her ribs and spines as if she were part of the house's frame. She sent the young girls to polish the silver until others could see their faces in it. She set a small pot at the hearth's edge for a rabbit stew the house children preferred when the adult table bored them. She remembered to set aside a portion of the rich stock for old Nana, whose teeth could no longer do the ministrations to meat. She salted just so, spiced just so, layered flavors like meanings. All of this could have been ordinary. It would have been ordinary, if not for the other ledger she kept. Near dusk, when the sun threw its final golden light over the river and made even the fields look forgivable, Eveline stood at the small locked cabinet in the pantry. She could have fetched the key under pretext, she could break nothing and pry nothing. But keys were not only metal. They were faith. The mistress had faith that Eveline would never read what was on the labels, the master had faith that any hand that touched these papers would be one that could not spell its way from danger to safety. Eveline's fingers hovered over the paper wraps in their neat stack. Calomel, she knew its nature. Laudanum, its soporific hush, the slow drowning in its amber. Camphor. Dover's powder. The one labeled bitter almonds made her blood run colder and then steady. Bitter almonds meant oil of bitter almond, the smell of cyanide, though she did not think the word as a scholar would. She thought it as a cook did, as a woman watching and learning. She had smelled bitter almonds once when the mistress had bought imported almond essence for a cake. Eveline had known by scent that it was not the sweet almond she would have used. She did not reach for the bitter almond paper now. She closed the cabinet and turned instead to the shelf that held apricot kernels in a small cotton bag, a thing an earlier cook had kept to flavor cordials. Apricot kernels had their own secrets. Eveline had learned them not from a book but from a woman who had learned them from a woman who had learned them from the kind of uncertainty that made women into pharmacists. She did not want pain. She wanted sleep, then quiet, then a reckoning spelled not with screams but with certainty. To make a household fall without the drama of a battlefield, that would be her grammar. She crushed the kernels carefully in a mortar, breathed through her mouth to lessen what she breathed in. She scalded them in milk and let the heat extract what the cold would not. She watched the color of the milk, the scent, just on the edge of a sweet that was not sweet. She set it aside, covered it, labeled it in her mind as a separate ingredient. She went about the rest of the supper as if she were only a cook making food for people who would live forever. She thought not of faces contorting, not of deathbeds, not of remorse as it was taught from pulpits designed to keep people like her from imagining heaven as a neighborhood they could afford. She thought of Isaiah. She thought of Ruth and Tansy and Liddy and Kate. She thought of old Nana and the way the woman's hands shook when she held a spoon as if a tremor could be inherited. She thought of staying, and how staying might be possible only if something else left. Eveline worked. She kept the almonds for custard separate from the apricot milk. She watched the custard thicken and tremble like something that believed in itself. She prepared the roast chicken with lemon and bay, skin crisping, fat popping like small punctuation. She simmered green beans with a quint of salt pork and a breath of vinegar. She laid the table in her mind and then in the parlor, directing chairs through Ruth as only a general could, and placed the master at the head, the mistress at the other, Judge Barrow to the master's right, Mr. Haynes to the left where his elbow would knock a glass if he drank as he always did. She reserved a small dish. "Why that one?" Tansy asked, pointing, always greedy for knowledge because knowledge tasted like the one thing not rationed by someone else's hand. "For the end," Eveline said, and smiled in a way that did not invite more questions. As lamps were lit in the great house and the yard caught those small suns on every pane, the guests arrived. Judge Barrow came with a belly forward like a man friendly with tables. Mr. Haynes smelled of sugar and port and the arrogance of men who own ships more than they own the sea. The minister came, too, asked as a garnish to remind everyone that God looked favorably upon those who ate well. Eliza Carswell shimmered in a dress the color of a river pearl and a necklace of small pearls that tried to look like the same thing. The dining room became a theater. Eveline was stagehand and author. The table groaned politely under platters. The first course was turtle soup, thinly faked with veal stock and the cleverness of herbs, only Mr. Haynes noticed, and he was too fond of his own voice to say so. The roast glowed, the beans shone, the bread wore its golden crust like confidence. The wine was red and then redder. Conversation did the tedious gymnastics of men showing one another how they leapt. Eliza laughed in those small places between men's sentences where a woman's laugh is expected to go. Eveline moved around the edges, quiet in the artless way of someone who had learned that quiet could be shaped like a tool. She placed plates before men who did not see the hand, only the plate. She watched bites taken and made a tally no one else could see. Your cook is improved, Judge Barrow said to Mr. Carswell, slurring the smallest degree, which meant the degree would grow. What's her name? Mr. Carswell glanced toward the kitchen door as if heaven had made kitchens precisely to be glanced toward. Eve, he said, then waved a hand. A woman. We have plenty. Evelyn felt the word like a blade. She used it to cut, but only inside, only where it would not show until it did. The custard would come after. It was the mistress's request, and the mistress's request was the house's command. In the kitchen, when the courses had been cleared and the room behind the dining room was briefly a wilderness of dishes and voices, Evelyn stood with her hands on the table as if holding the whole plantation steady. Tansy and Liddy waited. Kate watched with his hands flat, copying Evelyn's pose. Ruth slipped in like a shadow wearing a smile. Chairs? Evelyn said without looking up. 14, Ruth said. No extra place set. Good, Evelyn said. The word did not mean good, it meant known. She heated the apricot milk gently, added a spoon of sugar to make the close of the evening sweet in the mouth even to men with sour souls. She poured it into the small reserved dish, stirred once, twice, thrice clockwise. She added the almond custard to the main bowl, folded with patience until every spoonful would be consistent. She kept the small dish by itself. Who gets that one? Liddy whispered without the sense to be afraid of her own curiosity. Someone who asks for it, Evelyn said. Ruth glanced at her, eyes quick. Notes did not need paper. Evelyn lifted the tray with steady arms. The custard trembled in the glass dishes like a congregation trying not to show its nerves. In the dining room, the men were doing that thing of laughing and lying that had turned into a furniture style. Eliza's hands were white around her wineglass. Crispin had removed his jacket and looked like a boy wearing his father's permission. The minister was telling a story about sin that involved very little God and very much gossip. Evelyn moved among them and placed custard. Almond, Eliza announced as if it were a jewel. Savannah prides herself on almonds this season, she lied. No almond tree had bent over this yard, almonds came in crates and claims. Save me the biggest, Mr. Haynes said, grinning at Evelyn as if the grin might jump from his mouth to her body if she did not move fast enough. The largest for the largest appetite, Eliza said, turning the moment into hospitality rather than a humiliation, as women like her learn to do. Judge Barrow lifted his spoon and said, I confess a boy's love for sweets, and the minister said something about manna that made no one move closer to heaven. Evelyn served the master last. It was an old deference that allowed a new decision, it let her see who asked, who waited, who watched. Mr. Carswell had a small habit before dessert. He reached for the decanter not of wine but of what he called his thinking cordial, rum cut with something he refused to name, a hint of spice. He would drink one glass and then the sweets would come. She had timed the custard to meet that moment like two dancers meeting at the mark chalked unseen on the floor. He reached, he poured, he drank. Evelyn watched his throat move. She felt nothing like triumph and everything like a final step placed on a bridge she had built over an abyss. Is there sherry in this? Eliza asked of her custard, and then, very softly, very privately to Evelyn, perfect. Evelyn bowed, not to the mistress but to the work. Mr. Haynes spooned twice, then set his spoon down and smiled the vulpine smile of a man who has remembered something that will make others uncomfortable. Judge, he said. Tell them about the man in town, the free man who wasn't. Judge Barrow laughed, and in his laugh Evelyn heard the timbre of the scaffold. Ah, yes. Papers can be forged as easily as scripture can be misread, he said. We settled it. In the end, it was simple. Simple, Evelyn thought, that word that men used when something complicated had been made easy by force. Crispin's spoon clinked against the glass. He looked at Evelyn with curiosity and not much else. He had the kind of face that grew men without ever becoming interesting. Another for me, Mr. Haynes said, lifting his empty glass dish without shame, like a child in a house unafraid of slaps. Evelyn looked to Eliza, who nodded. Give him the special one, the mistress said, not knowing what she said and yet saying it like fate. He's a friend to our table. The special one. Eveline held the small dish by its saucer, felt the tremor of her own pulse in the porcelain, and crossed the few steps that could end everything or begin it. Mr. Haynes took the dish as if accepting a pledge. He laughed again. He dug his spoon in deep. The room breathed. Eveline set the empty tray against her hip, turned to go, and paused. It was the kind of pause no one saw because they expected a pause there, a servant's pause, a woman's pause. She listened. She heard the yard's night insects come alive as if someone had finally whispered permission. She heard the last of the sun scrape along the window glass like a soft knife. She heard the river in its patient corridor. She heard herself counting. 1, 2, 3. Mr. Haynes swallowed and then laughed at something Judge Barrow said. He lifted his glass to his mouth, then frowned, a small frown like a boy who has found a pebble in his shoe. He put the glass down. He touched his throat. He swallowed again, this time with effort. His eyes watered. He shook his head once, as if to say, too much sherry. He reached for his napkin. He swallowed. Conversation faltered in the elegant way conversation does when men who think nothing can surprise them are surprised by a small thing like silence. "Are you well?" Eliza asked, polite even when frightened, because fear had to be draped. Mr. Haynes began, then stopped. He put a hand flat on the table as if to steady the table from an earthquake only he felt. The judge chuckled with sympathy. The minister prepared a small prayer that would be more performance than plea. Mr. Haynes coughed, a single sharp sound like a door slammed by a gust. He coughed again. He took a breath that did not find all the air it wanted. He blinked. The room tilted around him, or he tilted around the room, it amounted to the same thing. Eveline stood at the threshold holding nothing. Her hands were clean and capable and empty. She could feel Tansy behind her, and Liddy in the kitchen doorway, and Ruth at the parlor door with a silver coffee pot she was not yet allowed to pour. She could feel the plantation itself leaning to listen. In this moment, the plan was both working and not. The apricot milk had done what apricot milk always did if coaxed properly and given the right mouth to meet. It was not violent, it was not theatrical. It was simply insistence, the body insisting it had been lied to. Mr. Haynes tried to stand. His legs were letters that had forgotten their alphabet. He sat again, hard, the chair gnawing the floor with a sound everyone pretended not to hear. "Perhaps a draft," the minister said, anointing his own helplessness with language. "Fetch Hawthorne," Mr. Carswell snapped, the way men do who mistake urgency for control. "Fetch." But Hawthorne had already appeared, as men like him do, drawn by the scent of disruption as hounds are drawn by blood. Eveline watched the overseer's eyes knife across the room, tallying, assessing, finding the scene where blame could be inserted and hammered through. She met no one's gaze. She breathed. She took one step back, then another, into the kitchen where heat made everything honest. Tansy's hand found her sleeve and gripped, small fingers ironing fear out and in again. "What now?" the girl whispered, the kind of whisper that knows its answer could be doom. Eveline looked at her, and at Liddy who had lifted a dish towel to her mouth like a curtain to hide behind. She looked at Ruth, whose eyes held an entire gospel of courage and calculation. She remembered Isaiah as if memory had hands. "Now," Eveline said, and even her whisper had grammar, "we clear the sideboard and make ready for coffee as if nothing in the world is happening but coffee." They moved with the solemnity of a ritual, because ritual could guard a person from the spear of panic. Cups set, saucers matched, sugar bowl filled, cream jug lifted with both hands. The kitchen became a metronome. In the dining room, Mr. Haynes' breath sawed in his throat. The judge was asking questions with the tone of someone who expects every answer to be a yes. Eliza's face had loosened the way a tightly tied scarf does at the end of a night. Crispin stood as if that would help. The minister reached for his prayer and found it heavier than expected. Hawthorne's gaze found Eveline through 2 rooms and one set of careful eyes. "Bring water," he said. "Bring camphor." He did not say, "Bring the cook who made the custard." He did not need to, the sentence hung in the room as obvious as a chandelier. Eveline dipped water into a glass. She knew water would not help. She lifted the small brown bottle of camphor with steady hands. Ruth moved before her like a scout, opening doors, closing them behind, making the path smooth. At the table, Mr. Haynes tried to speak, failed, tried again, failed more gently, as if language itself had become too heavy to carry. He looked up indirectly at Eveline, and for a moment there was a strange equality between them, the kind that sometimes appears when two people meet at the lip of the same cliff. He swallowed. Eveline held the glass of water in both hands so no one would see if her fingers shook. The house held its breath with him. He swallowed. He swallowed. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The room strained to keep its shape around that small, ordinary act. A man at a table, spoon set aside, throat working, candlelight broadening in the glass like a halo placed by mistake. Mr. Haynes' gaze lost its swagger and hunted for a place to land. It found no purchase on the faces around him, so it fell to the tablecloth, to his own hands, to the napkin smoothed tight as a sail against a sudden squall. Eveline watched as a midwife watches a birth she cannot stop or hasten, only witness. The sounds of the world retreated to the edges, the insects, the river, the hush under the rafters. In their place came breathing, the great Democrat. Mr. Haynes' breath shortened, sought a rhythm, failed, sought again. His lips parted. A thin sound slipped out, the beginning of a word that never learned its letters. Water, Eliza breathed, hand half lifted, decorum and alarm braided like rope. Eveline extended the glass, and Mr. Haynes took it with a hand that had appraised so many things it had forgotten its own bones. He wet his mouth, swallowed once more, the body's last obedience, then shook his head. Somewhere in the room a fork fell, and the sound ran across the table like a mouse. Judge Barrow pushed his chair back, the legs rasping the floor as if they tried to make sparks. "What ails you, man?" he demanded, as if the body should answer the law. Mr. Haynes' answer was a cough that pinched itself off mid-breath. His face had not yet changed color, but something had changed in the gaze, recognition peeling away from arrogance like paint under relentless sun. He put a hand to his chest, not the theatrical flat palm of melodrama but the small, private touch of a man whose heart had become a stranger in his own house. Hawthorne came near, smelling of saddle soap and vinegar, authority buttoned down to his last thought. He gestured brusquely toward the hall. "Camphor. Towel," he snapped. "And fetch the apothecary, run." This last to Cade, who had hovered just outside the doorway, part shadow, part boy. Cade darted, barefoot speed a quiet miracle. The minister cleared his throat, but the prayer that rose in him had too many syllables for this room. He chose silence, and the silence answered. Eveline moved in the space she had always been allowed, a small radius around the powerful to tend and to clean and to steady. She steadied. She reached for the decanter, she must not allow hands to find it again this night, and the gesture passed unnoticed even by herself. Her other hand found the napkin before Mr. Haynes, folded it, offered it. He wiped his mouth and left no stain. The neatness angered her, how trouble liked to arrive polite in polite rooms. Is the custard?" Eliza began and then strangled her own sentence. She was not a woman who believed in curses. She believed in lists. She began a list now, and Eveline watched it write itself in the mistress's eyes. Custard, almonds, the kitchen, blame. "Not the custard," Judge Barrow said sharply, as if verdicts could calm throats. "It's the rum. He's had too much, or it's bad. I told you, Haynes." The admonition died under the weight of his friend's need. Mr. Carswell stood so abruptly his chair toppled backward, hitting the floor with a bang that rippled through the walls. "Air," he ordered, and Ruth threw the windows wide so fast that the curtains snapped like startled birds. River air entered, humus and wet stone and the night's first dark. Eveline stepped back without ceding ground. Distance often told the truth. She measured the room, who had eaten what, how much, in what order, who had sipped the cordial and who had refused it, Eliza, who pretended to like what men liked but had never liked rum. She accounted for every spoon, every dish. The small special dish had found its mouth. The rest had spread sweetness evenly. Mr. Haynes leaned forward as if to stand, but only his thoughts managed it. His body remained fixed. His eyes found Evelyn again, and something unperformed passed between them, not absolution, not accusation, recognition. Then that door closed. He exhaled long and hard. The next breath failed to arrive on time. He waited for it as one waits for a fairy that has always kept its hour. A rustle, skirts, coats, a scrape, a chair, the rustle again. Then a single word from Eliza, warped with fear into softness. Hawthorne. The overseer's eyes had been pinning the room like specimens. Now they found Evelyn with such speed it felt like a thrown thing. "You," he said in a tone no louder than any other word in his life, and yet the whole room felt the point of it. Evelyn held his look for precisely one heartbeat, no more, no less, then lowered her gaze in a way that carried neither guilt nor subservience, only the knowledge of her own role in this house. "I'll fetch a cloth," she said calmly. To Tansy, "Boil the kettle, quick quick. Liddy, clean cups for coffee." It gave them occupation, and occupation is a bridge over panic. By the time she returned with the damp towel, Mr. Haynes was shivering in short, hard shudders. Hawthorne took the cloth roughly, as if kindness might contaminate him, and pressed it to the man's brow. Eliza hovered near her cousin, eyes wide, voice disciplined to kindness. Crispin flinched each time the breath stuttered, trying to hide it each time as if a flinch could be trained out of a body. The apothecary arrived in a panting hurry, the father, not the son, for the son feared night summons. He examined without removing his hat, a man preserving dignity against an enemy he could not see. He lifted lids with a thumb, pressed at the neck, listened at the chest. "Spasm," he said, as if naming a thing domesticated it. Perhaps the shellfish in the soup. Perhaps the heat. The night was not hot. Perhaps the rum. He reached for his satchel. "I can bleed him." "Do it," Judge Barrows said instantly. Bloodletting made sense to men who solved by subtraction. Eliza swallowed. "Will it help?" she asked Evelyn, not because Evelyn was a physician, but because Evelyn never answered with a word she did not mean. "It will keep him occupied," Evelyn said gently. The apothecary tied a ribbon of cloth, selected his lancet, and the room turned its face away from the tiny red fact of the body. A few drops splashed, and Mr. Haynes' eyes flickered. The breath came, mist, came again. "Coffee," Ruth whispered behind her, a signal, a rope lowered. "Now," Evelyn said. They poured. The aroma cut through the fear, grounding the room to ordinary. Cups moved hand to hand, even Hawthorne taking one as if heat in a palm proved something about control. Evelyn's hands remembered themselves in their work. She could feel Tansy settle into the comfort of routine, Liddy too. Ruth moved with that grace she wore only when no one forced her to move at all. Mr. Haynes swallowed a sip, and the swallow caught like a coat on a nail. He put the cup down with a small, hard clink that would echo in Evelyn later. He tried to stand again. He failed. The apothecary murmured to Hawthorne, and the two men bent their heads together, conspirators against uncertainty. Evelyn took advantage of their closeness to clear the decanter. The cordial slid into her hand and then into the sideboard drawer, a small disappearance. She covered it with a folded cloth. When she straightened, Hawthorne's eyes were on her again. "Leave that," he said. "As you say," Evelyn answered and left it, in a drawer instead of on the table. She met Ruth's glance once, so quickly that only women would see it. It did not happen quickly. That was the mercy in the cruelty. Mr. Haynes did not convulse or twist. He shrank. His breath shortened the way a winter day does. His fingers uncurled. Men's fingers finally forget their habits. An hour passed, then less, then more. The apothecary bled again and wrung his hands like linen. The minister found words, spoke them softly, and if there was a God in the room he chose to be silent, which is a choice. At last Mr. Haynes exhaled long, like a boat reaching its slip, and let the last of his breath go. The room stared at him as if breath might be coaxed back by the force of staring. It did not return. No one wept. Some men fear tears as if salt water might rust them. Eliza pressed her lips together hard. She looked toward Eveline, but the look had changed from the way one consults a person who fixes the world to the way one searches the world for someone to pay. Hawthorne stood to his full height. It made him look thinner. He looked thinner when he felt most strong. His gaze slid from Mr. Haynes' face to the table, to the custard dishes, to the tray, to Eveline. "No one leaves the house," he said. "No one." The word was for the enslaved. The free men heard something else in it and ignored him. Crispin, his voice trying out authority like a new jacket, said, "We must send for the sheriff." Later, Judge Barrow answered, "We must first account." No hysteria. He turned his knife of attention toward the kitchen. "Who prepared the dessert?" Eveline did not feign confusion. "I did, sir," she said. "With almonds," he said, not a question. "Yes." "Anyone else handle it?" "My girls helped set the dishes." She nodded toward Tansy and Liddy. "Ruth carried the coffee." Judge Barrow's gaze did a slow, false kindness to the girls as if they were puppies who might pee on the floor. "And the almonds were?" "In the pantry, sir." She did not add, "In the blue tin, a gift stolen for you by your own law." He opened his mouth to continue, and Eveline stepped into the next sentence before it could be written by the wrong hand. "Mr. Haynes was the only one to take a second serving at once," she said. "At the mistress's request." Her tone did not implicate, it recorded. "He alone drank the cordial before dessert. The rest drank wine." A pause. "He has had coughs before. Mr. Haynes," she added softly, because truth could be widened by a fine brush. "He had, on previous visits, a winter cough." Judge Barrow's mouth thinned at being given facts by a woman. "By this woman." I am not, making accusations," he said, and in so saying, he made Aaron to rope. "But precautions must be taken." His eyes flicked to Hawthorne. "Keep the kitchen under watch." Hawthorne's nod was joyless. Joyless was the only safe joy he knew. The body remained at table. Death is bad at manners. Eliza gave orders in a voice pitched low. The children were removed to bed with a story about sudden apoplexy. The tablecloth was drawn up carefully to make the table into a bier. Men conferred. The apothecary wiped his lancet with an air that pretended competence. The minister scribbled a note to himself that he hoped would become a sermon more than a trial. Eveline cleared. The tray grew heavier because plates are heavier when the dead look at them. Back in the kitchen she exhaled, once, a single long, quiet breath like a blessing withheld. The girls waited for instruction as if instruction itself could save them. Ruth shut the pantry and leaned on the door as if the right wood might hold the world. Kate returned and hovered between door and hearth, the messenger's uncertainty when there are no more messages to carry. "Listen," Eveline said. They listened until even the mice seemed to stop their private conversations. "We will be questioned. You will say what is true. The custard was sweet, the almonds were ground, the milk scalded but not scalded over, the sugar measured careful. You will say we ate none while we worked, because we never are allowed to." Her mouth twitched, then hardened. "If asked who fetched the blue tin, you will say Ruth. If asked why, you will say the mistress asked for almonds and the kitchen smiled and delivered." Ruth nodded once, jaw clenched. "I'm not sorry," she said under her breath, as though to herself. Eveline placed a finger against Ruth's wrist in passing, the briefest contact, a ceremony. "Sorry is not a tool," she murmured. "We will use only tools." Hawthorne appeared in the doorway with the sheriff not long after midnight. The sheriff wore the night as if someone had thrown a dark coat over him while he slept. He yawned, then frowned at his own indiscipline. He had known Haynes for years. Men who attend auctions together share a certain glue. They asked. Eveline answered. She gave them the kitchen's ledger, ingredients, steps, witnesses. She did not mention apricot milk any more than she would mention prayer. She did not lie except by omission, and omission is a kind of truth where the world is divided as this one is. She let Judge Barrow speak as much as possible, for talkativeness in men builds scaffolding on which they climb to their own preferred conclusions. Toward morning, the house turned the corner into the part of night that looks like dawn but isn't. The sheriff collected the decanter. Hawthorne sealed the pantry with a strip of wax and the sheriff's signet as if wax were a spell. The body lay in the front room under a shore of white cloth. The children slept eventually. Eliza did not. Evelyn sat on the kitchen step with a cup that held only warm water. The river breathed its patient breath. Cade settled next to her carefully, as if the air might crack. "Miss Evelyn," he said softly. "Yes. They gonna blame us?" "Maybe," she said. "Truth comes." "Maybe not." "I ain't scared," he lied. "You are." "It's fine. Fear is a tool too. You just don't put it on the cutting board." She almost smiled at the thought. "You keep it on a high shelf." He nodded like a man. He was 10. Morning came. Morning always does its work, indifferent to the night's small wars. The house roused itself because grief does not suspend hunger. Evelyn made coffee. She boiled eggs. She sliced bread. The ordinary becomes a shield on days when the extraordinary has entered the room. Hawthorne kept his station, a soldier at the pantry, a sentinel at the back door. His eyes swept, arresting without manacles. Evelyn ignored him with precision. The girls moved within the narrowing aisles of their duties. Ruth nursed her small private smile like a wound that would be scarred before anyone saw it bleed. By noon, word had traveled as riverborne as any rumor ever rode. Men arrived in pairs to do a certain kind of murmuring in corners. Widow Haynes sent a carriage and a note. The judge wrote one back in his tight script. The minister polished a sentence until it shone without illuminating anything. The sheriff took statements in a second biscuit. In the afternoon, the doctor came, a different kind of apothecary, with spectacles and a watch that clicked like a nervous insect. He had been fetched by the judge as an ornament of seriousness. "We might learn something from the organs," he said, into the room, into the law, into the future. He looked, with apology, toward the parlor where morning lurked like a disappointed debtor. "We could examine, after, that is." Eliza stiffened. The word examine had too much intimacy for her. No, her voice would not be crossed. Judge Barrow's mouth pursed. "We should not be ruled by superstition. Mrs. Haynes will want." "Mrs. Haynes will want him uncut," Eliza replied, eyes sharp. "Do not make a spectacle here. Do not turn my table into your theater." For a moment something like admiration passed through the room, quick as a swallow. Men reap contempt for a woman and harvest respect by mistake. The doctor bowed. "As you wish." He looked over his spectacles at the custard dishes laid out to dry and wanted badly to say something very clever. He did not. He left the clever unsaid, and in leaving it, kept his dignity. The next day was a Sunday that felt like a Tuesday. There was service in the little white church off the road where the Carswells owned half the pews by gossip and the other half by money. Evelyn sent Tansy and Liddy to sit with the house crowd, to look innocent and humble and wonderful, tools all. She did not go. She stayed in the kitchen and boiled linen and scoured pans that were already clean. Rage likes to be given employment. She scrubbed wood until her arms went heavy with their own sturdiness. Ruth came in at noon with the temperature of the church still on her face. "They whispered what they always whisper," she said. "And some new things. But old things have longer teeth." "Who listened?" Evelyn asked. "Everyone who had ears." "Who believed?" Ruth smiled without mirth. "Everyone who had need." Evelyn sliced onions fine as thread and dropped them into a pan with butter she had skimmed from a morning's patience. The scent rose and softened her shoulders. "This house won't hold," Ruth said, not meaning the roof. "It will hold," Evelyn said, "until I've opened the door I want." Ruth's eyes sharpened. "What door?" "The one that does not have us behind it." She set the knife down and wiped her hands. "Listen now. I need you to remember a letter." Ruth blinked. A letter? In the master's desk, the small one in his study, second drawer, under the false panel. Do you know it? Ruth smiled then with true delight. I do. She told more, the key hidden between the canvases on the wall, the habit of men to hide things where they stand to admire themselves. Fetch it when the minister keeps the men past dinner, Eveline said. Bring it to me. Bring Cade too. They did not need to discuss danger. Danger was the air they breathed. They discussed instead sequence and timing, grammar. The letter came that afternoon folded in 2, then in 4, paper worried soft at the edges by the habit of secrets. Eveline did not open it immediately. She set it on the table. She called Cade. She called Tansy, Liddy, Ruth. Even old Nana came, drawn by the gravity of a closed letter like old planets or by new suns. Eveline opened it. The seal cracked with a small, indecent sound. Inside, the judge's handwriting, precise, confident, a man who wrote like he spoke, without apology. Ephraim. If trouble comes of the shipments, you will say you know nothing of them past the wharf. My name will not be mentioned. Mr. Haynes has agreed to say the barrels were spoiled. The customs man is paid through Michael. Do not make me regret generosity. B. Eveline read it twice, then a third time to be certain she understood every river channel. Shipments, she said softly. Barrels. Spoiled. Ruth's eyes glinted. Rum, she said. Or sugar. Or, something men guard more than their wives. Something that makes them lie in letters, Eveline said. We will keep this. She folded the paper and slipped it into the pocket sewn into her skirt. The letter felt like a new kind of knife, not for cutting flesh, but for cutting falsehood. What are we doing with it? Cade asked. Opening a door, Eveline said. Not today. But soon. When the soon arrives. It came faster than even she expected. The inquest met on Tuesday in the dining room, a farce performed where real dinners had been eaten. Men arranged themselves as men do, with their importance placed before them like cards. Judge Barrow presided with a dignity undermined only by the way his eyes darted to the sideboard where the decanter had once stood. Eveline was called. She stood straight, hands behind her back, the picture of obedience altered only by the fact that her spine was made of iron. Questions came as expected. Answers came as she had rehearsed them on her tongue until they tasted like water. Then the judge reached for his trump. Is it not true, he said, voice modulated, that almonds can be dangerous in the wrong hands? In all hands, if the almonds are bitter, Eveline said. But we do not keep bitter almonds in the pantry. Calm. Flat. True. Eliza, he began, and Eliza put a hand up, not in defense but to stop the sentence that would make her the judge's prop. She said nothing. It was a powerful choice. The judge's jaw tightened. We must reach a conclusion, he announced. We cannot leave this matter unclosed in a house like this. Hawthorne's eyes swung to Eveline again, and the world began to tilt toward the easiest ending, the kitchen, the cook, the scaffold. Eveline lifted her chin a fraction, a tiny rebellion. Sir, she said, and the room resented the sound of her initiating speech. We all ate the custard. All were well but one. One man alone drank the cordial before dessert. If a thing must be called cause in order to call this closed, call the cordial cause. She let the alliteration settle like a teacher's chalk on a board. Silence followed, offended. The judge recovered. We will not, a gentleman's private habits are not on trial. And yet the kitchen is, Eveline said, not moving. A murmur. A sound like wind through wheat. Judge Barrow gathered himself to pronounce something as inevitable as sunrise. Eveline reached silently into the pocket of her skirt and removed the letter. She did not flourish it. She held it up gently. Read this, she said. He saw his handwriting the way a man sees his face in a mirror when he has not expected the truth of it. Color rose and fell on his cheekbones as if the room had mount and valley. He did not reach. He did not dare. Mr. Carswell leaned forward, Eliza too. The sheriff took the paper with something like relish, the pleasure of a pivot. He read. The room held another kind of breath. This is, the sheriff began, and then did not know the law word for what it was, so he used the plain word. Trouble. He looked at Judge Barrow with a blankness that men who make their living obeying polish to appear like fairness. Barrow's voice lost the room and hunted for cleverness. This is not relevant, he said. This is a matter of trade. Shipments, Eliza said quietly. Barrels. Spoiled. She turned to Hawthorne. The cordial came from barrels. From Haynes' warehouse, Hawthorne said slowly. I fetched it myself last week. He did not like being made into a witness against the man he had chosen to follow. He liked less the feeling that he had been used. Evelyn stood as if at her own stove, attending to a simmer. If a conclusion must be drawn, draw it, she said. But draw it true. Men dislike being handled. Judge Barrow drew himself up. The inquest finds, he announced, with the fatal finality of his profession, that Mr. Haynes met his demise through misadventure. He paused, tasted the phrase, then added piety like sugar to a bitter tea. By the visitation of God. God, dragged in to clean up men's messes, said nothing, as usual. The kitchen, for now, was spared the rope. Hawthorne did not forgive the humiliation of being turned from hunter to hound. He kept his watch over the kitchen, but the focus broke in him, some new calculation took its chair. He walked the yard with his hands behind him and his lips moving as if learning a new prayer. He watched Evelyn with a precision that felt almost like study. Evelyn kept her routines. She cooked. She cleaned. She mended. She taught Liddy to slice with the patience of letters. She taught Tansy to judge a boil by scent and not by bubble. She taught Ruth to count chairs and men and moments. She taught Kate to read, but not with chalk. She traced the shape of an A on his palm with her finger and said the sound into the hollow of his hand as if she were telling a secret to Skin. Days spun. The river rose and fell with its older reasons. The judge rode to town more often. Men gathered in corners and discussed shipments like weather. Widow Haynes sent her man to collect the decanter and the cordial barrel and remove them to town with solemnity. Hawthorne watched the removal as a man watches his own shadow. One night, in the week that followed, the judge returned late and alone. The house had shut its eyes. The yard slept. Evelyn, who slept lightly, heard the horse and felt the hoofbeats in her marrow. She rose without lamp and went to the kitchen. She stood in the dark and watched the door as one watches a haunted place. The judge entered without knocking. He carried the day's fatigue in his face and another thing too, fear, the great equalizer. He was a man who believed himself immune to weather, to be wet startled him. He sat without being asked. He lifted his hat and set it on the table, a ritual he had always imagined beneath him. He looked at Evelyn without theatrics. You and I understand things, he said. We understand sequence. Evelyn stood without moving. We understand consequence, she said. He nodded once. Yes. He dislodged a paper from his coat. You will take this, he said. You will not ask. You will simply take it. She did not reach. He unfolded it. A traveling pass. Signed. The kind of paper that made a body into a person for just long enough to cross a county line. For whom, Evelyn said, the calm in her voice costing her everything she had. For the boy, Judge Barrow answered. And the girl if you wish, the small one. It will say apprentice to a cooper. A lie that does not wake the house. Cade, she thought, and Tansy. The letter sat on the table like a small boat with a strong rope tied to it. Why, Evelyn said. It was not disbelief. It was the law of exchange, what for what? The judge's mouth tried a smile and failed. Because the letter you found is not the only letter that could be found. Because barrels and shipments and names have other names inside them. Because if a rumor starts from the kitchens to the wharf, it will move like fire. Because, Because Haynes is dead and someone must be punished, and if not you and yours, then me and mine. He looked suddenly old. Because this is a bargain and I am a man who only knows how to live inside bargains. Evelyn's heart beat once, twice, 3 times, each a different organ in her: love, fear, strategy. And what do you want, she said, besides your life kept tidy? He exhaled, and it sounded like truth leaving a tight place. You will keep your kitchen quiet, he said. You will not speak of letters, of shipments. You will not let rumors be born. You will let the widow bury her husband in peace, and you will let me remain judge in a town that will bury you if it knows the better story. He slid the pass across the table. Take it. The river packet leaves Thursday. The Cooper will be on it. He will sign. Thursday was 2 sleeps away. The river packet might as well be a star. Evelyn considered. She thought of the girls and their small brave hands. She thought of Cade's palms and the alphabet written in their skin. She felt inside herself for the place where anger lived and found there a second room beside it where tenderness kept its lamp burning. 2 passes, she said. Boy and girl. And a coin for the first month's lie. Judge Barrow's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a wince. He nodded. Done. He produced the second paper from some inner fold of his careful life. He laid a small purse beside it. The coins chinked together like a handful of little, compromised truths. And one more thing, Evelyn said. You will let Ruth's man be buried proper when his time comes, not in the far place they make for us. That is not, he began and stopped, remembering that dignity has a price and he must pay it sometimes. Done, he said softly. I will speak, and the ground will be available. That is a promise with my name on it. Promises with names on them are fragile in the hands of men like him. And yet. He rose. He set his hat upon his head and looked at her frankly now. You did this with milk and almonds, he said, not a question, not a sentence that could be quoted in anyone's court but his own heart. I know it as I know my own pen. Evelyn kept her silence as if it were a child she would not let be taken. He inclined his head not as a judge but as a man who has met someone who could have been his teacher. He left. The next 2 days were a craft. Evelyn sewed a small pocket into Cade's shirt, another into Tansy's skirt. She placed a tiny folded scrap of paper in each, a single word, north, in the block letters she had taught herself to make, and a small charcoal map of the river's bends from Savannah to the first place that would not know their names. She gave the girl a thimble, she gave the boy a button with a dove carved rough on it. If you get separated, she said, ask for the dove. Someone will find you. She had no certain knowledge of that. Only faith braided out of other women's faith, a rope made of whispers. On Thursday before dawn she woke them with hands that did not tremble until after she drew them back. You will keep your heads down, she said. You will remember that apprentices look bored. You will let the Cooper put his name over your small lives a while and you will not resent him for it. You will go to the river like noon going to 3 o'clock, calm and inevitable. You will find a church in the second town and you will ask for water, and you will ask for the woman with a scar on her wrist who bakes bread. All this she had learned not from a map men but from laundry lines and pie sellers and fairy hands, women whose tongues knew the route better than any compass. Cade nodded too many times. Tansy nodded once and blinked hard. Evelyn kissed the crown of each head with a speed that made the kisses feel like thoughts. Ruth took them to the road in the half-light. I'll walk them as far as the oak, she said. All roads in the south begin at an oak. They went. The yard did not notice. The house noticed later. Hawthorne came to the kitchen door before breakfast finished and stood there like a verdict. Where's the boy, he said. Where's the small girl? He did not make their names, because you must not name what you plan to hunt. Sent with the Cooper to town, Evelyn said, back turned, stirring mush with the serene rhythm of innocence. Mistress asked for new barrels by harvest. The Cooper takes apprentices to carry and fetch. She let the lie lean against the truth so closely that they looked like the same child. Hawthorne narrowed his eyes to slits that saw better. Who told you to send them? "The judge," Eveline said, "and this time it was truth, and truth is a better weapon than lies. You can ask him." Hawthorne's jaw worked. He wanted to contradict the sentence and could not. Barrow's name was a door even he hesitated to try. He grunted. He left. Eveline sagged only after the eggs were off the heat. Ruth found her leaning against the pantry's cool plank and set her hands against Eveline's shoulders. They did not speak. Women save words for when words can alter a tide. Days became days again. Widow Haynes wore mourning that made the heat miserable around her and pulled it tighter because misery comforted her. Judge Barrow walked as if his boots had stones in them. Hawthorne's patrols grew less frequent, then shifted toward the fields, picking season already whispering promises of backbreaking yields. Mr. Carswell tallied his losses, counted his gains, blinked, and began to call it Providence the way men do when luck favors them. Eliza quieted. Her lists narrowed to what she could control: candles, linens, the position of flowers on tables. Once, when the house was asleep in the pattern of mid-afternoon, she stepped into the kitchen and stood without touching anything. "My household," she said. No greeting. No preamble. Eveline waited. "My household was harmed," Eliza continued, her voice not trembling because trembling would oblige her to feel the tremor's cause. "By my table." She looked at Eveline. "By your hand." "By the cordial," Eveline said, gentle as a hand laying a cloth over a wound. "By the man who," she did not say more. They both knew the rest of the sentence. It hung between them like a lace shawl with a rip in it. Eliza's gaze did not break. "You will not do this again," she said. It was not threat. It was not bargain. It was the plea of a woman who has been taught that control is what keeps blood off the floor. Eveline nodded once. "No," she said, and in that no lay a labyrinth of yes, to herself, to the lives that had been placed on a packet bound north, to the old woman whose hands shook, to Ruth, to the girls, to Kate across a river now. "I will not." She spoke the truth and did not tell the whole of it. She had always known there would be one night only, one grammar sufficient to turn a paragraph into a different story. Eliza exhaled. Something gentled in her shoulders. "You are the best cook I have had," she said, and then barked a little laugh at herself, hateful to her own ears. "God forgive me, I am grateful to you." She left before gratitude could look like love. The season turned. Rice whispered its dry gossip in the fields. The river shrugged and ran brown and wide to sea. The kitchen breathed. The alphabet grew larger in Eveline's mind. She stole minutes to write it on scraps, shopping lists no one knew were grammar lessons, tallies that were prayers. She began to leave small marks where only the right eyes would find them, a chalk line at the gate post on Thursdays, a bundle of breadcrumbs tied with thread over by the old ferry rock on Sundays, a code that would feed someone who knew how to see it. And then, because the world is not a story that only moves forward when we push it, consequence walked back up the path. A rider came after dark with Trouble strapped behind him like a second saddle. Trouble had a marshal's badge and a way of telling stories that turned facts into threats. Rumors had reached town that Haynes barrels were not all filled with rum, and that some men with money liked their money multiplied by quiet arrangements. The marshal asked questions with a smile that closed at the corners like a purse. Judge Barrow performed indignation, a role he played with unnerving skill. He opened his ledger and closed his heart. He invoked God and law by turns. The marshal listened and then narrowed his eyes at the kitchen door. "And you," he said to Eveline, "what do you know about almonds?" "Enough to make a custard stand at attention," she said, and the room chuckled because the joke was safe. He did not laugh. "Enough to kill a man?" She held his gaze for a fraction too long and then away. "Enough to feed a household," she said, and wondered if her voice would betray her by shaking. It did not. Nothing more. The marshal left with a note of dissatisfaction he would turn later into energy. He would speak to the widow. He would speak to a wharfman with debts. He would speak to the judge again. He would perhaps return with a paper that made everything into someone else's decision. Hawthorne watched this new weather with a farmer's face, calculating, resigned. He called Eveline aside as dusk fell and the sky broke open from purple to bruised black. "I will not save you," he said. She lifted an eyebrow. "I did not ask." He nodded once. "But I will not hunt you either. Not now." He looked past her at the yard where boys chased each other through the dusk as if the world had not changed. "Get what you can out with your little chalk marks. The harvest will come. Then winter. Then I will forget I said this." Eveline blinked. "Why?" He looked embarrassed by the need to answer. "Because I know men like Haynes. And men like the judge. And you. And because Isaiah was my sister's boy." She felt her heart drop and then rise as if it had traversed a hill no one could see. She had not known. He had not spoken his grief until now because grief is a luxury men like him cannot afford unless it comes wrapped in utility. "Thank you," she said. The words tasted odd in her mouth, but gratitude is not loyalty, it is acknowledgement. He grunted and left as if he had not said anything at all. That night Eveline walked to the fairy rock and left 2 loaves instead of 1. She sat on the rock and let the river tell her what she already knew, that even victory is a kind of sorrow, that leadership feels like a cold lamp you hold steady while others pass, that guilt and resolve live together like cousins forced to share a bed. She thought of Cade's hands and their letters. She thought of Tansy's way of nodding once when a whole house might nod 3 times and still not understand. She thought of Ruth's smile like a knife kept clean. She thought of Eliza counting candles as if the right number would undo one night. In the weeks that followed, more small things changed. Eveline taught Liddy to read real letters, not just the recipe disguised as one. She wrote the word bread on paper and then baked bread beside the paper. Liddy laughed as if the word had made the loaf. Tansy learned to score a pie with a hidden message, the direction of the vent cuts telling a traveler whether to follow river or road. Cade, if the river did not steal his breath or the world its way, would arrive at a dock in a town whose name Eveline did not dare to write. He would stand alone and he would be found. She made this true in her mind until it was true outside it. Winter arrived in the peculiar way it does in Savannah, more in the bones than in the air. The house kept fires that had drafts but not truths. Men grew restless with their doubt about shipments and decanters and costs. The judge stopped coming by the house except on Sundays when appearances cover purchases. Hawthorne grew brittle with fatigue and authority, both are ruinous to a man. One morning, months after the inquest, a letter came addressed to no one at all. The post rider handed it to a yard boy, who handed it to Ruth, who brought it to Eveline as if carrying a newborn over the threshold. Eveline turned it over. No seal. Inside, a line of words blocked in a hand she had taught, safe at church. Dove. She sat down hard on the kitchen chair. She pressed the paper in both hands until it wrinkled. She breathed. She did not weep. Joy does not always open the same door tears do. Ruth pressed her shoulder, and that was weeping enough. The marshal did return. He produced a paper at last with stamps like little crowns. He took the judge by the arm in the yard, not rough, but not gentle. There were words. There was a quietness after. He led Barrow toward town with decency that looked like triumph to men who wanted to see it that way. The town opened its doors to a small scandal because small scandals give people permission to ignore the larger ones that shape their lives. Will he hang? Tansy asked that night, not bloodthirsty, only curious about proportion. Eveline shook her head. Men like him don't hang, she said. They sag. She meant reputations. Eliza cooked soup that night with her own hands as if good soup could save a name. She brought Eveline a bowl in the kitchen and stood until Eveline took it. We will have fewer visitors now, she said. I find I don't mind. She paused. And I find I cannot hate you. She left before the finding could hurt. Spring returned. The river shed its winter like a shawl. Children ran muddy and shrieking, as if the world had been held underwater and was now allowed to breathe. The kitchen woke early and slept late. The chalk marks on the gate post changed to circles on Tuesdays, new code, new runs. Eveline had become the sort of woman others came to with the quiet things. She listened. She matched names to routes. She gave a loaf and a small folded scrap of paper and a laugh that warmed the room like a stove. One dusk, Hawthorne came again to the kitchen door and stood with his hands in his coat, as if he had lost the habit of knowing what to do with them. "Carswell is selling," he said. "Not the house. The holdings." "Some." "Enough." Eveline nodded once. Men cash out of discomfort the way gamblers leave tables only when the deck turns cold. "Who buys?" "New men with new names I don't like," he said. "Men who smile with their teeth too much." The thought made him look tired and, to Eveline's surprise, human. "And you?" "I'm going," he said. "West. I have a sister there who lets grief talk at her table." He glanced up at her. "Keep your chalk for different gates." She inclined her head as if he had made a polite farewell and not a small, strange blessing. On the judge's last Sunday before formal charges would make him vanish into a cousin's plantation upstate, where disgrace is stored among heirlooms, he came to the Carswell house and stood in the parlor where a man had died. He asked for Eveline as if for the ledger. She came, wiping her hands on the towel she kept clean for the sake of habit. "News," he said. "Your boy, the cooper's apprentice, sent word clear to town. Clever as a ferret." He allowed himself a smile. "He will be taken farther north under a new name." He held her gaze a fraction too long. "You did this." She said nothing. He took that as permission to continue. "And I did what I promised," he added. "Ruth's man will have the ground near the Oaks when his time comes. Or anyone else you name, within reason." He flinched at his own last two words, the cage inside the gift. Eveline nodded once. "Thank you." He looked at her like a man studying a map he has used too long to trust. "You have made this place unsafe for men like me," he said quietly. "It is an accomplishment I will not admit to admiring." He tipped his hat. He left. Eveline went back to her stove. She finished the stew. She sliced bread. She laid the table in the way that announces dignity even to people who would not extend it. She took a breath and let it go. The year rolled over. The house, relieved of a judge and an overseer and a constant guest, found a new shape. It was not a free shape. It was a shape that allowed more air between the bars. Old Nana died in her sleep in late summer, hands folded, mouth soft. Eliza permitted Ruth to place the old woman under the great oaks, and for that permission Eveline forgave her some things she had not expected to forgive. On an evening warm enough to leave the doors open, Eveline set out a supper of simple delights, tomatoes sliced and salted, a roast chicken, a loaf split by hand. She watched the family eat and thought of other tables, other hands, other summers. She thought of the alphabet again, the endless arrangement of letters into sentences into stories. She thought of the word freedom and how rarely men allow it to be spoken by those who need it most. Ruth approached with a folded scrap and laid it silently by Eveline's plate. Eveline wiped her hands, unfolded it, and saw a hand she did not know. It said only, "The dove is a woman now. She bakes." Eveline closed her eyes. She opened them. She ate. That autumn a woman came to the back door with a child on her hip and a hunger in her eyes that was not only for food. Eveline gave her food. She gave her a map. She gave her a word to write on the inside of her wrist if anyone asked, north. The woman would be seen by the right people. The child would learn to spell his own name. One night in first frost, Eliza came to the kitchen and found Eveline alone with a cup of tea and a letter she did not read because reading is not always what we need. "Eliza, Saturday, do you ever think," she asked, looking not at Eveline but at the cold hearth, "of leaving?" Eveline turned the cup in her hands. "Every day," she said. "And then I think of the leaving I can make without walking. I think of the leaving that happens when a woman writes on a palm and that hand becomes a boat." She sipped. "Some of us must be shores." Eliza looked at her for a long time. The look contained the most uncomfortable truth of all, that a woman in a white dress might need a woman in a brown dress to tell her what dignity looks like. Then you will stay, she said, and did not make it a command. For now, Eveline said. Until I am more useful as a weather vane somewhere else. Eliza laughed softly, genuinely. You are impertinent. I am exact, Eveline said, and they shared a smile that meant, we are more alike than this house understands. Winter came again. The river did not care. Eveline kept baking. She wrote more notes that were recipes to everyone and letters to a few. She taught 2 more girls to slice onions without tears. She fed the poor white woman with the missing tooth who had lost her husband to fever and was too proud to ask until she had to. She fed the field hand whose back would not straighten anymore. She fed a lawman once who did not know he was hungry for mercy. On a Sunday like the first one, years later, Eveline set an almond custard at the table. She did it with intent and peace. Eliza looked at the dish, at Eveline, and nodded as if christening a child with an old name. Judge Barrow, in a place far from theirs, ate bitterness in a different form. Hawthorne sent a letter from a land with taller grass and lower horizons. Cade, grown, sent a drawing of a dove shaped by a hand that knew the alphabet of its own survival. Tansy wrote a whole letter about bread and men and kindness in the north that was larger than winter. She signed her name with flower ghosts still on her fingers. Eveline took all of it and laid it in the ledger she kept under her ribs. She balanced it often, cruelty on one side, courage on the other. The courage always felt heavier, even when the numbers did not. She had poisoned a household once. It was the only time. She had measured, stirred, poured, and watched a life leave without relish or regret. She had opened a door, and then another, and then left some open behind her so others could walk a road she had learned to name. She did not become a martyr or a queen. She became what the kitchen had made her, precise, generous, unflinching. She had learned the grammar of resistance and spoken it until other mouths could say it too. On an evening when rain stood in the air like a thought not yet lowered, Eveline stood in the doorway with Ruth. They watched the yard darken into its old, familiar self. Ruth touched Eveline's arm and pointed. By the gate, a small chalk circle had been drawn in a hand Eveline did not recognize. Beneath it, a scrap of paper held down by a pebble. Eveline went to it and lifted the stone. The note was brief. I owe you a loaf, it said. A woman with a scar. Eveline smiled and felt the river inside her change its banks and run wider without breaking anything. She went back to the kitchen. She washed her hands. She put flour on the table like blessing, and began again. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.